Well, hello, and welcome to another lesson of the Focus on Agility CMS course. I'm Marcelo Lewin, the Headless Creator. As always, get a hold of me right there, Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. Today, my guest presenter is Joel Varty. He's the CTO of Agility CMS, and he's actually back for another great lesson. Today, he's going to talk to us and show us how to use roles and workflows inside of Agility for content governance. And speaking of content governance, I'm actually going to bring in Joel and we'll have a little conversation about that before we get started. Joel, welcome.
Hi, Marcelo. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you back. Thank you for doing this. Let's get started. Let's jump in. People if they want to know more about you personally, we got the other lesson they can go watch at the beginning. Today, I wanted to talk to you, since you are going to be talking about content governance inside of Agility. I wanted to take a step back a little bit and just talk about content governance in general. Maybe we can first define it. What is content governance so people understand that a bit better?
Yeah, so inside your CMS, is all the content presumably for things like your websites or your mobile apps or anywhere that you're sort of sharing content via the APIs. So you want to make sure that the right people on your team have access to do all the things with that content. And it could be that there's workflow that content needs to go through before it's going to be published on the website. Or maybe it has to do things like, be previewed and stuff like that. So you could even have external workflows that are happening. And we're going to focus today on mostly just making sure that's like, hey, don't just give everyone administrator access to everything. And how can you set that up?
This could include like translation, making sure that SEO is done properly. There could be many steps right in the process. Now, could it also include like field level content governance where you define how many characters and what are, or would that fall more under style guide?
Yeah, I think we spend a lot of time on the content modeling section and those kind of things. And obviously you can never do enough of that to get it great, put in like all the field help hints and making sure that all the links and the types are exactly right for the structure of the content. I want to focus more on the administration of the actual content from the who's going to be working with it, and what roles do people have, and how does content kind of flow through the system on a kind of a macro level.
And why is content governance important for those organizations that are going, let's just go live and we'll figure all that out later?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of organizations start with, what, we just want to get it out there. We're just trying to get our new design implemented. Oftentimes that's where people choose a new CMS when they're going to bring on a system like that, or they do a whole new content modeling exercise, and then everyone has access to everything. We really recommend looking at the team structure before that and setting up a good sort of rhythm of workflow with those various team members to make sure that everyone understands what their job is, and how they fit into what makes the most sense. And that oftentimes start off with a whiteboard of how content should move through, as opposed to let's jump in and start working in the CMS right now.
And involve your team that's going to be affected by that governance, right? That's
Absolutely.
Really important. Don't do it in a silo. Yeah. Finally, before we jump into your presentation, how does an organization prepare for content governance?
Well, a lot of the times we'll work with customers and just talk to the members on their team, and that's usually the first thing. It's just like, let's have a conversation about what your job is and what content is important to you within the organization. What team do you work on? What department are you part of? And to sort of set that up. And once we have the team set up in terms of like, hey, this is our list of people and what they all need to do, then we try to map that into the roles that are available within the CMS itself inside Agility, and then go from there to say, from a whole instance level, what does everyone need to have access to? And then what do people need to do at the sort of more micro levels for individual pieces of content?
I think at the end of the day, it's important to at least think about content governance, right? Even if you're not going to design it and implement it, at a minimum, think about it, because it'll save you a lot of headaches in the future.
Yeah, 100%. At least make it a choice if you're going to give everyone, administrator access to start from. And make it a choice to make it on purpose.
Right, exactly. Okay, cool, great. Well, we see your slides. I'm gonna let you get started on the presentation. For those of you watching live in the chat, if you have any questions for Joel or myself, go ahead and throw it in there. I'll jump in and ask Joel. Joel, it's all yours.
Thanks. Yeah, so just a few slides to get started to give us some point of reference to talk about stuff here. So with each content team, you're going to have folks with different roles and responsibilities. And we want to make sure that that's reflected within the CMS, just like I was talking about earlier with Marcelo. So that's number one idea, is that understand who's on your team. what are the different, roles on the team of people who are represented now. And sometimes you might have an idea of, oh, we don't have someone in this role yet, but we will. And so there's, we need to account for how the team is going to grow as well. These are the various roles that are available within Agility CMS. I'm just going to go through each one real quick. And this is in a kind of an order. So as someone who's just a reader, this is someone who has access to see the content within the content manager itself, but they don't have access to edit anything. This is great for if you want to allow them in there, but only give them access to maybe create or manage things in a certain section. And we'll get into that in the demo in a little bit. A contributor has reader access, but they also have the ability to create content. And they can edit the content that they've created, but they can't edit content that someone else has created. This is really good for someone who is, maybe they're in there creating blog posts as a guest editor and they only have access to a certain number of things. If you have editor access, then you can edit anything anyone has created, which is really useful for someone who needs to go through to potentially, fix copy, or, they want to be able to review all of the content. As an approver now, this is where we get into workflow. So an approver can edit content, but they also have the ability to click approve on content that's been requested for approval. And we'll show that as part of the workflow. Publisher is the next step in the workflow, where content that's been approved now can be published by a publisher to go live on the various channels that it needs to be available from through the API. So that's the kind of workflow stuff. And content can be declined, which means it goes back to be, an editor could then change it again, request approval, and go through that cycle again. And we'll show what that workflow looks like a little bit. Then there's a little bit more specific ones if we go on the column on the right. For report viewer, this is someone who is specifically able to see reports. And this is useful if you have someone that maybe they're like a C-level access where they have reader access. You don't necessarily need them to edit anything on the website or in your content, but you need them to be able to see things. So report viewer is really useful for that. Then we have the designer role. So that's a very specific role that allows people to add modules onto pages. And there's a couple other permissions that are available through there too. So that's a really interesting one because we don't necessarily want someone to move the components around within the pages. Then we have some more advanced ones here. So a manager has access to all the settings, but they can't add users. Then we have the delete access. So a delete is an additional role you would add on to something like contributor potentially, or editor if you want them to be allowed to delete a particular thing. And then we have administrator who has full access to do everything. And as I was saying before, you probably don't want to give everyone administrator access, but it's also a really good way to learn the system when you're trialing it or trying out something for the first time.
A couple of things there. Agreed about the administrator. Don't give everybody, and I've seen companies do that because it's the easiest thing. Just give everybody access. They have access to all content types, everything, and then they realize, oh my God, something disappeared from the website, and it was an author that did it by mistake with admin access. Number one. But question on the roles. Number two, on the roles. Are you able to create custom roles? For example, let's say we have a translator, right, that we just want the ability to translate into Spanish pages, right? Are we able to create that?
So custom roles, that's a feature that's actually coming in about 3 weeks into Agility, 3 weeks to a month. It's in development right now. And another feature that's coming is something called teams, where you can give a whole group of users a particular role access. So those two features kind of work hand in hand, and they are coming down the pipe, not available just yet. But a lot of times you can do most of what you need to do with the roles that are there. And we work with customers a lot to sort of make sure that we kind of have all those little, people call them nuances, I often use word, to get all those nuances of how the access should be distributed throughout the team.
Okay, cool, thanks.
All right, great question. All right, jumping through. So we can also have content access as well as, so the roles that I showed you, they can be applied globally, and we'll see how that looks, but we can also apply those roles to a particular piece of content within the system. So each one of those can have its own security. So you could give somebody reader access globally, but edit access to a particular piece of content. Each page can have its own security. And within the sitemap, this is hierarchical. So within a page, if I give someone security on the root to like a root page, all the pages underneath of that will by default inherit that security. So we'll look at how that operates. And then each asset folder within the asset section can also have its own security. So we can get pretty granular with all the different ways that we can assign roles within the CMS. And then those really apply really well to workflow, especially with the roles like approver and publisher. So you can set up your own workflow on each item, like I said, on whether it be content or pages, with a combination of role access and the notifications that go along with that, so that when someone requests access for something, then the approver can get notified, and so on and so forth. And that's sort of a high-level description that sort of describes everything. Now let's jump into the CMS to see what that actually looks like. So I'm going to demo today with actually my own personal website, because this is a website where I did give everyone administrator access because it was just me that was working on it. But let's go to the case where maybe I've got some more members that have been added to my team and I want to give them specific access to stuff. So I'm going to jump into the settings. I'm going to go to user management. All right. And you can see I've got 3 users in this system now. So one of them I'm going to call reader. So this is reader.agilitycms.com, and you can see they have the reader role. And so when they log in, they will only see they will only see stuff, they can't edit stuff. They won't see settings and they won't see reports or models, right? I can also give someone editor access. You can see here, I've got this person as an editor. They will see the same things that a reader sees, but they'll actually be able to work with them, okay? And then I probably need to have someone in here. Let's just create, actually, let's just adjust this a little bit. I've got my developer, and I've given them manager access. I'm going to adjust that a little bit and just give them approver. So now the workflow would be something like the editor can go in and edit content and create things. The developer can go in, they can approve things because they think it's okay. They've actually reviewed it. And then myself, who's not listed here, because I'm an administrator, and because as Joel, my name doesn't show up in the users list because I wrote Agility. But I would be able to actually publish stuff when it comes through. Okay, so that's the kind of workflow that we can start from here. So as a global level, that's how we set this up, which is pretty straightforward. Now let's actually go to the content level and dig into it a little bit more from there. Okay, so potentially on my blog post list, this is where I definitely want to have a bit of workflow going on here, okay? So you can see this is the list of all my blog posts. So what I'm gonna do is open up this settings menu here and jump into the security. And so I really want the person who, this reader, so they're actually going to be a contributor to this blog. So I wanna actually allow them contribute access. So you can see I'm giving them contributor role on this list of blog entries, okay? So there you go. Now that that's been done, they will be able to actually create things in here, but they won't be able to edit stuff that's been created by somebody else, all right? Let's go a little bit deeper. And we've got, in this case, maybe I'll have the editor role, okay? This editor person, and normally they'll have real names, I'm going to give them approver, okay? Let's set that up, all right? So now we've got that set up so that we've got someone who can contribute to the blog and someone who can approve entries in this blog. The second part of a workflow isn't just having access to something, but it's actually setting up the notifications so that when something happens, who's going to get notified? Because if someone requests access, I need to get some indication that that's happened. So under alerts, we can add an alert now to say, okay, whenever something happens, I want this editor access, this editor user, I should say, to get an approval, an alert. So I want them to get alert when things are requested for approval, all right? So we'll go ahead and we'll set that up. And I'm gonna add one more alert for myself when things are approved. So this is me, and because I'm gonna be the one publishing stuff on my blog, I need to get an indication when something's been approved. And you can kind of go crazy with all the different stuff. It's interesting that sometimes people don't like to see these as much. And what we've seen is sometimes where people will turn these off for themselves to say, you know what, I do not want to get any more notifications because I'm in this list all the time. So if you have a user that's kind of living in the CMS and they're in their day-to-day, you don't necessarily need to give them notifications. Another interesting thing is that when you're an approver and someone requests approval, or if you're a publisher and someone approves something, you will actually get a task that shows up here for that piece of content to say, hey, so-and-so requested approval for this piece of content, and that'll show up in your task list in Agility. So that's how tasks work with workflow and alerts and notifications, right? So we've seen how to do it on content. We can do the exact same thing on pages. It does get a little more complicated on pages though. So I've got this page called fiction. And on my fiction page, I've got the books that I've written. So what I might do here is do a similar thing where I've got that user called reader, and I might give them edit access to this page because for whatever reason, I want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And now I've also got this, see this propagate? So what I can do is push this same security onto all of the content and all of the sub pages to this page because pages are hierarchical. So if I click propagate, it's going to basically send that same security down to all the child pages. Of course, this doesn't have any child pages, so let's just go ahead and create one.
Quick question on that
Yeah.
while you're doing that. It'll send it to all the child pages underneath it, but will it send it to all the content types that make up this page, that content is coming from this page?
That's right. So what you're referring to is what we call modules, and modules can themselves have related content as well. So if I go to this page, so right now, let's just check it. The security does, oops, wrong button. I click on the security and you can see it's been added there by default. So it automatically gets propagated down. And it will be on this page as well. So any sub pages. So that actually is how that happens. If I go and change something at the top level page, it doesn't automatically push it to the sub pages, but I can pull it down from there if I need to. So from here, it is already there. But if it was different, I can actually click inherit to go and pull the security down
From the top, yeah.
Yeah. And this can happen if pages are moved around and things like that.
And this illustrates something, right? We got a lot of power here, but you can't just jump into this and start doing this. This is when we go back to our conversation at the beginning is think about governance, think about what it is you want to do, who's going to be involved. Because if you start jumping into this and going to all these pages, you will get lost and then things are not going to work, right?
That's right. Especially when you get into this hierarchy, you have to have an understanding of who's on the team. And that is usually good to have a lot of people print off the list of things on a piece of paper and put it on their desk. But also, especially as you're building a website, to understand what the intended sitemap is meant to be. Some people have those in things like a Visio file. The person who's working on security should have a really good understanding of the content architecture and of the team structure itself.
Right, definitely. Cool, thanks.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too. As you move forward, and sometimes people come on and off the team, and a lot of times people will work with development agencies who are building the website. A lot of the time this stuff is set up by that development agency if it's not an in-house development. It's important to make sure that if you change your development partner or if the development partner finishes the project and then kind of moves on, that you have someone on your internal team that is managing the governance. And you should always have that. Someone understands the content architecture and can make changes to it, and someone who understands the security model and can make changes.
You should own that documentation. That's very important. Even when I work with clients on content modeling, I always say, hey, create your own Miro board, give me access, but you need to own it because when I'm done, you guys are going to move forward. And that's a really excellent point. It's not just agencies, right? If you have an external agency, but even if you have an employee that has it all up here, what do you do later when you want to, and I always tell people, make changes in that documentation first and then go to your system. That way it's always in sync.
Yeah, and a lot of times we'll advise, have a second person mirroring you when you're doing this so that they understand too. So that, but at the very least, yes, have a living document. It's great to say that, but it's another thing to actually implement it. And it's a really great rule to have to start from the documentation, because this stuff can get out of hand. There's a lot of stuff that seems invisible because sometimes you don't have access to certain things and you just can't see them and you don't know that they're even there.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, and so pretty much I've gone through all of the different portions of the security and the workflow that you can set up. And for a user that's actually working in here, they're going to have the ability to then only see the actions that are available to them. So what I'm going to do is actually change the settings on here for 1 second on this page. And I'm going to turn on requires approval on this page. So this is by default on some sites. I've had it turned off by default. Okay, so this is the one setting we haven't looked at. So on this page now, I have the publish button because I'm a super user, but you can see we've got this request approval. So as I'm just actually going to go through some of the states on this page as if I was an editor. I'm not going to log out and log back in, but here we go. So I'm going to say, yep, I think it's ready. Here we go. So I think this page is ready. And now this page is going to be requested approval. So notifications will be sent out, tasks will be assigned, for people who have the approve access. And now an approver would only see the approve and decline. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to approve this page because I think it's looking great. Looks great. And when we look at the history for this page, we're now going to see that that's there. So we have this is where we requested approval, and this is where it was approved. And if we're ready for the page to be all good, myself as a publisher, I would now be able to publish. That same workflow is available both from the both within the content section and within the pages section. Oh, and now that I remember, I've forgotten one section, which is the asset section. Now, assets themselves in Agility don't have workflow, they just have security. So if I wanted to lock down potentially or grant access to the posts or one of these folders here, I would just simply click on edit, and then on security tab, again, we have the same dialog. Potentially, I want to give someone who only had read access globally. Potentially, I want to allow them to have edit access to work with the images, or maybe even delete access to this folder. Okay, so this editor now has that extra access on there, and I can now allow them to do that. So not as much complication going on within the asset section, but certainly at all these different levels from content, pages, and assets, you can have really granular level access to manage the security, which is grant different users access to do different things on a role-based permission. And that's pretty much it for Agility CMS with content governance and workflow.
That's very cool. Now, a question about different languages and locales.
Right.
Do we have, I know you mentioned teams and custom roles coming up, but is there anything from a governance perspective around locales specifically? Here we have one locale, right? English,
Yep.
Canada,
Yep.
but in general, what about if you have multiple locales?
Yeah, great question. So locales are in this settings section. And by default, I think if you set up a trial account, you're allowed to have 5. But normally it's unlimited for the number of locales that you can have, you can set up. So it could be any number. And sometimes people use locales for like regions, but usually they're for things like languages. So if I have a locale for FR, so I set that up. If I have access to a piece of content, I have access to that content in every locale. Right, so that's important. The roles are not locale specific. So typically what we'll do is if people have a great use case that you mentioned earlier was, hey, I've translated this, now I need to make sure that it's available in French or whatever languages or locales that needs to be present in. You'll have an approver in each of the languages, and they will all get the notifications that something has been requested approval in that language, and the team would have to be, understand that who should be actually operating on which locale. But in a lot of cases, this ends up being an external agency or an external team that is going to do something. Like we have a few sites where there's like traditional Chinese and Mandarin and a couple other where they don't have in-house staff. In that case, what folks have set up is a webhook that will notify their team. And so this is like a lot, external translation tools often have like their own APIs. So that will actually send a piece of that content away to that external system, and it's now being requested approval. That system will then respond back to Agility with another API call in the management API to actually update that content with the new piece, with the new translated content, and we'll request approval, and then the approvers can go through it from there.
Any plans to get it to the granular level of locales? Like, let's say I want to give access only to Spanish because it's a Spanish translator versus a French translator.
Marcel, this is really interesting. That has never come up in almost 20 years of working with CMS. Not once has someone requested it, but I will definitely jump to our product board and put that on there because it's a really great idea. And I'm going to guess that people working in multiple languages just don't ask for the feature, but they probably would use it. So that's a really great feature request.
Yeah, I could see that. Definitely. Cool. Joel, great presentation again. Thank you so much for doing this. Anything else you'd like to throw in, or if people want to get a hold of you, that email address right there?
Absolutely. Joel@agilitysms.com. Always happy to take emails.
Thank you so much, Joel. I really appreciate it. And thanks to the rest of you for being here. I really hope you enjoyed this lesson. And stay tuned for many more lessons coming up soon. So until the next lesson, we'll see you. Cheers, everybody.